Today, we're going to be talking about outmaneuvering cyber criminals and what that means. And before I begin, I just wanted to do a couple of quick initial issues. The first one is the slide you see in front of you. I want to remind you that the New Mexico SBDC has a number of really great resources available, including the webinar series. We will also make the presentation available to you if you're interested, and it'll have all the links in it and stuff like that. So you don't need to be writing stuff down or taking screenshots if that's what you want to do. Just contact SBDC and they will give you this presentation. My name is Larry Donahue. I'm a lawyer. I've been a lawyer for almost 30 years, not quite. And I also have some other unique background and experience that I'm going to talk about in just a second. Today, we're talking about cybercrime. And, I'm making the assumption you're a business owner or you have something to do with managing or running a business. I'm assuming you don't have a federal laboratory or government entity or organization, although a lot of the concepts here will apply, but I didn't really write it for that. We're going to talk about, what is cybercrime and then how do you quote unquote deal with it? And, I have bad news right off the bat. There's no one thing you can do. There is it's really a process. There's a number of things you have to do, and it depends on a lot of different factors, the type of business you have, the type of technology, the type of people. So what I'm going to do is define a high-level framework, an overall approach that, will help you address this. And maybe I'm being too presumptuous, but, as a fallible human being, if I'm presented with a huge problem that it has a lot of different pieces to it and I don't understand half of it, I tend to put it off. I tend to delay it. And that's not what you can do here. And so what helps me is not operating with a blank page, but actually having some sort of initial outline that I can start filling in the gaps. So I'm assuming that that's going to work for you. And that's how I did the presentation today. So I do want to warn you as well, I'm going to have very little specifics on specific programs and technologies you should use. And instead, we're going to talk about process and issues and contracts and relationships and how we make all of that stuff work together so we can fight cybercrime and outmaneuver the cyber criminals. The objectives is we're going to understand what cybercrime is, how to deal with the right approach, and then specifically, we have opportunity for the criminals. How do we minimize that? We have the impacts to your business. How do we minimize that? And finally, we have the costs and expenses associated with this to your business. Again, how do we minimize that? And that's what we're going to focus on today within the next 60 minutes. Plus, I have some examples and backgrounds and stories that I'll try and weave into this as well. And if I speed through this and we have more time, I have some really interesting stories to share about cybercrime, and here's why. I used to be a secret informant for the FBI, and I don't advertise this. I don't put it in writing. I provided, and the company I was with provided information that was critical to the FBI solving a very significant terrorist event. And, so we're kind of worried about my safety. I don't talk about the specifics, but it was a lot of cloak and dagger computer issues. It gave me a lot of appreciation for our law enforcement, especially at the federal level. I have a lot of background in this, and I've also been an attorney a long time. So I want to tell you and remind you, I'm a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer. I'm going to give some legal advice here, but it's in a general context. So I might not know your specific circumstances, and what I say might actually be wrong for your specific business. So just take this in terms of general advice and not specific legal advice. Also remember, New Mexico SBDC is not a law firm, and therefore they cannot give you legal advice either. We do have one question. I have a food truck and will be doing business in the next month or so. My concern is how to protect my credit card transactions and my customer see credit card information. Is this something I need to be concerned about? Absolutely. But if you have a food truck business, I assume you're going to have a point of sale device where you swap a credit card. It's going to immediately communicate with the bank. Let it be the bank's problem. If you're going to start writing down credit card information, leaving credit card or what's called PII, personally identifying information around, then you got a bigger problem. So I don't, see simply accepting credit cards and swiping them with a POS or point of sale system as a super concern, although you should always be concerned with how you handle credit card information. And by the way, your merchant account processor should have some good tools and documents on how you should conduct your business so that you can operate in a secure fashion and how you might do something like that. So let's start. Cybercrime. What is it? So this is what I pulled off a wiki, the first bullet. And it's a crime that involves a computer and or a network. The issue here, though, is the computer may be used as the tool to conduct the crime, or it might be the target, i.e. your computers, your networks, your systems. And usually it's going to be harmful to security or financial well-being. Now, I say most, not all, most cyber crimes fall into one of two categories. They're attempting to gain access to something, other systems, data, sensitive information, or they're trying to perpetrate a fraud, financial fraud. Now, there are other types of cyber crimes, by the way, and I mentioned that I dealt with the FBI in some terrorist issues. That clearly would be another form of cyber crime, and we're not going to discuss that because that's really, 99.99% of the businesses out there don't have to deal with those issues. So we're not going to deal with that here. What's important to understand is that these efforts usually involve attacking, tricking, or taking advantage of a vulnerability, a defect, some sort of weak point in one of two areas, technology or people. And so that's why when I told you a little bit ago that there's no one magic bullet here. This is a number of different things you're going to have to do. And what I recommend is a structure and how to deal with cybercrime. And I think what we have to do is start with the assumption that you are going to have a problem. You are going to have a cybercrime that's going to affect you or your business. It's going to happen. And I have almost 40 years of technology and computer experience. I told you I worked with the FBI and I have had problems. So if I'm going to have problems, I promise you, you're going to have problems as well. The goal here would be to minimize, one, the opportunity available for criminals. Two, the impact associated with when something like that happens. And then three, the cost. When it happens to, you don't want it to kill and sink your business. So how do we do those kinds of things? Well, the first thing is you have to ask yourself, what are the potential impacts to a potential cybercrime that impacts you or your business? And there are some that just come off to the top of the head or top of mind that I think affect all businesses. One is damage to reputation. Another is harm to others. If you have clients or customers, and let's say you're a medical facility, well, there's patient records out there, and you have to get detailed information about billing insurance. And you don't want that kind of stuff to be hacked and disclosed. So that could be a huge problem for others. You could have loss of data or other important information. And that hits to the ransomware stuff. And we're going to talk about that in more detail. Another one is an interruption of or to the business. And, a quick example would be the oil pipeline that was impacted. There was a significant interruption to the business, which had a dramatic impact to a lot of people. So, but those aren't the only potential impacts. Your business is unique. What other impacts might you be concerned about and have to deal with? And so you need to understand that. We're going to talk a little bit more about how you can figure that out for yourself. So what I want to do now is go through the various components of this. And I hope you're starting to see the framework that I'm proposing. One is minimizing opportunities. So we have to figure and look at those. And what do we do to minimize opportunities for criminals to take advantage of us? Two, identifying impacts and dealing with those and minimizing the impacts associated with that. And three, costs. So that's the initial framework here. So let's talk about the first issue, minimizing opportunity for criminals. Really, and there's really one issue here, right? And that is hardening a hard word for me to say, your vulnerabilities or your weak points. And this chain thing is a great metaphor. All it takes is one weak link to create a problem. So you really have to harden everything and remove and eliminate as many weak points as you have. Well, what are your weak points? Every business is gonna have its own issues. So I'm gonna break it down into 3 areas: your people, your technology, and other third parties, vendors, contractors, partners. Those are kind of like the 3 main vectors into your organization. Now, you may have other vectors, by the way, that I'm not aware of. I don't know, let's say you get a lot of business from the federal government, then maybe another vector would be your customers or your clients. So you need to sort of define that for yourself as a category and then address each one of these categories as appropriate or necessary for your business. So let me explain what I mean by that. First, let's talk about your people. Do they have the proper tools? And I'm going to give you 2 examples right now. One is, do you have a company password program? And we use Dashlane, and there are other really good programs out there. And I'm sorry I don't have the names of those, but you should really look at, rate, review, Google this, rate and review Dashlane, and look at the other programs out there. There's a number of good ones. And the goal here is you want to manage your passwords securely so nobody's writing them down, number 1. And 2, they're all different and very complicated so that people can't brute force or guess your passwords, or they guess one password and then they can go and use that for other accounts. The other thing, by the way, other proper tool is an antivirus program. Do you have that set up? I can't believe how many people still don't have antivirus, so they don't keep it up to date. The other issue you need to do is define critical tasks and then create appropriate escalation procedures for those. And so what would be a critical task for any business? How about one? A vendor wants to walk into the premises and look at something. Well, I would argue that's a critical task. If a stranger, even if they're wearing a UPS uniform or a FedEx uniform or the water vendor wants to come into the back premises, you should probably have an escalation procedure for that. And so you don't have your front office staff, like a receptionist, who tends to be the lowest paid, lowest educated, least common denominator of a company making that decision. So you'd want to escalate that to somebody that can validate and watch and manage, so you don't have people just randomly walking around your facility somewhere. Now, I'm going to give you an example of where I got hacked. Let me rephrase that. My firm got hacked with this. I did not have the right critical process in place. So I'm a lawyer, I'm a law firm. I have conference rooms right by reception. I was in a conference room with a client, and our receptionist got either an email or a text claiming to be me, and that needed her to immediately go and buy a bunch of Apple gift certificates, and claimed that I wasn't available to give a credit card number, so she had to use her own credit card and that I would reimburse her. And I was in the next room. My receptionist was so upset about all this, she went and did exactly what was asked in the email, thinking it was me, forgetting that I was in the conference room next door. And honestly, this makes me mad talking about it because it's infuriating. But my receptionist, of course, scratched all the gift certificate numbers off and took pictures and sent them away. And she thought she was doing a good thing according to my instructions, when of course she was, our firm was being hacked. And the reason I say being hacked, because somebody was pretending to be me. So that means they read our website, they went to the About Us page, they figured out who was one of the owners of the company, and they figured out who one of my receptionists was, and they were very specific enough to at least fool my receptionist. So the problem with that is, is it my receptionist's responsibility? Yeah, of course it is. Do I tell the receptionist, well, that's on your dime, you screwed up? Well, if I want her to quit and leave, but otherwise needed to reimburse her, I ended up reimbursing her. And the reason I did that is because I did not have the appropriate escalation procedures defined for something like that. When she did all of this, then she decided to tell somebody about it. That somebody else said, no, there's no way, Larry's in the conference room. So I get a number of people bursting into the conference room while I'm talking to an employee. They tell me exactly what happened, and you can imagine my reaction. Very angry, very annoyed. And so now the receptionist is starting to cry. My client is wondering what the hell's going on. So my fault for not having the right escalation procedure in place. And now we have that. If anybody in the firm says they need money or credit card information or gift certificates, nobody is allowed to release that information without talking to a partner. And if a partner is not available, then one of the senior attorneys, so that we can get some higher level resources on it to evaluate whether something like that is legitimate or not. Please learn from my mistake on something like that. But other critical tasks, what would they be? Shutting stuff off, approving stuff, approvals on refunds, information about certain clients or customers. Think through those issues. And the more you do, the more you define, the more you take to your people and make sure they follow those, you are making it harder for cyber criminals to take advantage of you and your business. So that means, you do need to have monthly training sessions and regular exercises. We do that, and I can't tell you, every damn month, I'm telling people, do not click on a link in an email. How many times do I have to tell you that? Well, it turns out at least once a month. I have some employees here that still forget. So we're starting to get to the point where if they're now the cause of a problem, that we're probably going to let them go. So we're putting the fear of God into people, because for crying out loud, you do not click on links in email. Just don't do it. If the bank says, hey, click here because you got an important message, go to your bank directly from the browser. Don't click on it from email. Now, if you're more technical, you can mouse over the link and verify and validate that it's an actual legitimate link. But I don't recommend that for most people, because you will have legitimate banks, BBVA, and others that will use other links not necessarily related to their own domains, and it just becomes a big mess. So that's something that you need to train people on regularly. You need to hold everybody accountable, as I mentioned, and we ourselves are working on that. You need to update your HR manual, employee guidelines. If people are going to be making dumb mistakes and clicking on those links in emails, at some point, you need to be able to not allow that. You're going to have to hold people accountable. This is really important, and I think this should be a no-duh, but if you have PPI, personally identifying information, that relates to PCI compliance, SDP compliance, credit card information, maybe health information, depending on what kind of business you have. With us as lawyers, we don't have a point of sale system per se that we run credit cards. We ask people to fill out a document, send it in, and we use that credit card information. So we actually have set up a structure where we don't keep that information on hand. We use it once to generate a transaction, and then we literally shred and delete that credit card information so that if we get hacked, the credit card information is not available. So nobody can take credit card information from us. But you need to think through those issues and make sure that you are not inadvertently exposing that kind of information. And that could be a really big problem, because credit card companies will charge you fines and fees if you have some sort of exposure that releases credit card information. The other thing, another no-duh here, is don't make stupid business mistakes. And I don't mean it in a condescending way. We all make mistakes. They become stupid, though, if you really know better. And so what would be an example of that? Sending credit card information through email or storing it unencrypted. Don't do that. And if you know you're doing that, you need to make that a priority and fix it. Other things, if you're handling medical data, you know about HIPAA, but do you really know about HIPAA? Do you really know what those requirements are? And is your systems and processes and people set up for that? Are you asking for birth dates and social security numbers in a lobby where other people can hear that kind of information? If so, you could have a potential problem and you need to fix that. Let's talk about technology briefly. And now that was all just about people. So you think about the monumental problem we have here about dealing with cyber criminals and how to handle that. Remember the framework. We are trying to minimize opportunities for the criminals. We talked about people, and I just threw out some examples here for you guys. You need to be thinking through your own issues as well on how to make your people less susceptible to problems. But we have the same issue with technology, you know, and some just obvious stuff here. You need to keep everything updated and regular security patches. You know, you need to remove and change default logins. If you have a firewall or a router in your data center somewhere, I promise you it came with a default login. It's going to say something like admin or administrator or system, and then it's going to have a default password. That default password is going to be password, it's going to be nothing, or it might be the same thing as the name, admin, administrator, or password. So I just took 10 seconds to give you the combinations of things that hackers are going to immediately try when they sense something from the outside coming in. So you have to change those things immediately, and you got to enforce your people to do that as well. Now, the other thing is, and I promise you, very few businesses and people seem to do this, but you have to change your passwords regularly, especially for the important accounts and systems that you use. You also have to do that when turnover occurs. Now, I get people telling me, well, I trust so-and-so. And, you know, my answer is, so what? This isn't about trusting somebody. That somebody can get hacked themselves. And I had this crazy thing with a family member. They ended up getting hacked on their computer because they clicked on a stupid program that a family member emailed them. And their answer was, well, I trust so-and-so. And I'm like, you trust so-and-so to know whether the program they're sending you is free of viruses and backdoors? And then of course you see the realization click like, oh, it's not that you can certainly trust a family member or a previous employee, but they can get hacked themselves. And so what you need to do is eliminate the possibility of them becoming a problem, whether they're intentionally trying to do so or not. The other thing is, I think we don't do a good job of leveraging the experts. You know, I still talk to a lot of people that are busy trying to set up their own Exchange server and, you know, their own, you know, computer system or data center. And I'm like, why? You know, you got Office 365, for instance, you got, you know, Google Docs, you know, you have some really strong providers out there, and they're going to be better at security than you and or your one or two staff members, your IT staff members. Speaking of that, you do need to make it a critical component of your business. You just do. You know, and if you're a small business, let's say, you know, you're just accepting credit cards and nothing else, that's fine. But don't assume you have all the pieces of the puzzle yourself. There are really good IT firms in New Mexico. I have dealt with a number of them myself. Contact New Mexico SBDC, and they will give you a list of vendors in New Mexico who can sit with you for an hour and make some suggestions for you. Just spend a little bit of time, understand what the issues are, and leverage them. Get some help. The other thing is I want you to consider is maintenance plans and agreements. A lot of people, you know, you'll buy a computer product and you won't pay for the maintenance plan or agreement. You try to save a little bit of money. Don't do that. Pay for the maintenance and agreements. Make this somebody else's problem to get some help if you can. And then of course, this is a big one, but it depends on your business. You know, does the technology you have support and guarantee the standards that you need? HIPAA is a big one, obviously, for medical. You know, I myself, we deal with a lot of credit card information, so we care about PCI and SDP standards. There's millions of other standards, literally, maybe not millions, thousands. And you need to understand what's important for your business, your license, your relationships, and make sure the technology supports that. So, and then finally, I mentioned antivirus on the, for your people piece, but every computer still need antivirus. And I know this is going to come as a shock to you, but your handheld devices can also be hacked. So you want to be very careful always in what you do and what you access with your handheld devices. And you want to consider technology that can help keep those things secure. And for the love of God, Never sign up to an unsecured network. Just don't do it. You know, there's still some unsecured networks out there. And I think even the airport here, Sunport, I think I was there and I noticed the network was unsecured, or maybe I'm thinking of another airport. But I'm like, oh my Lord, this is the worst thing in the world. A hacker's just going to sit down in one of the restaurants and siphon up information and, stick in back doors and hack, older phones that aren't up to date. I mean, it's just the worst possible situation that can happen. Don't let that be you. So finally, on the minimizing opportunities, let's talk about your vendors, contractors, partners. These are the third parties that your business interacts with somehow. And those are areas of weakness as well. And so you want to make cybersecurity a deliverable or a requirement for all related vendor agreements. Are you giving vendors access to your system somehow? Well, gosh dang, they better be trained on your processes and systems, and you better have that buttoned up. You want to make sure that they make cybersecurity a priority and that they leverage the latest technologies. So, and we've seen issues in the news, haven't we? SolarWinds is an example where the federal government was using that vendor for actual security issues, and they got hacked and then created a problem for everybody else, not just the federal government. Don't let that be you. This is a big one. And I have mixed feelings about this. And the reason I say I have mixed feelings about this is this makes me a lot of money as a lawyer. Why? Well, a lot of times we business leaders are too busy. And so as one example, we will maybe hire an accountant and we'll have them set up, our accounting system. For instance, QuickBooks Online is a big one. And what do? We go and tell that accountant, oh, you go and set up the account and everything like that. And for me, thank you very much. I'm really busy. I just need to go and access the reports. Well, you're giving a third party, your bookkeeper, your CPA, ownership control of an important process, an important system, your accounting system. Don't do that. You have to suffer through it and you have to create the account yourself. And you need to control the account and you need to control the login information. And in this silly example I gave, QuickBooks Online, you can create secondary users that can then access the system. Why would you want to do that? Because one, you can control it. You can, stop their access. Number one, you can limit their access. So for instance, they can't delete anything, they can just modify it. That would be a way of reducing potential problems for you. QuickBooks Online, though, isn't the best example I can give. Some of the better examples I'm seeing is where you're giving access or control to your bank account information to your in-house controller or your accountant CPA. I've also had issues with businesses hiring marketing companies, and those marketing companies are then going out, and I've seen them do everything from purchase the domain name and website and get all of that stuff set up to setting up social media accounts, on LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and so on. And then guess what happens? The relationship stales, or you eventually want to hire somebody else. And then if you have somebody who's not as scrupulous as you are, they say, oh, these are my social media accounts, you can't have them. Or they don't even give you the information. So they're just out there just gathering dust and not helping you any further. Don't let that be you. And then of course, if they get hacked, then the hackers have access to those social media accounts. And that just gives them more ammunition to go and try and pretend they are you or pretend they're your company. And we as lawyers have seen emails, fake emails, not from us, but they're pretending to be us, trying to reach other parties. Hey, Larry, the lawyer, you need to provide this information. And I've had phone calls. Why are you asking for this information? And my answer is, I'm not asking for that information. Who's asking for that? So you want to be careful about that. And the more you can control the various devices and third-party accounts is really going to help with this. You need to consider redundancy for critical relationships. An obvious example is if you're doing a lot of credit card processing, why would you just have one merchant account? You really need two or more so you can spread that risk. I've seen people in businesses, our clients, that will process a lot through one particular merchant account provider. They reach their credit limit and then get shut down. And now all of a sudden, now they can't process anything. So don't let that be you. The other thing is, and this is really important, the contracts and agreements that you have with these third parties, if you're relying on them to protect you, well, shouldn't it say that in the contract? And better yet, if they screw it up and it costs you money, shouldn't they indemnify you, hold you harmless? And that just seems basic to me. And I think a lot of times we overlook that when we sign contracts and form relationships with these third parties. So now let's talk about the second element that I raised in our framework. The first one was hardening the weak points, making it harder for cyber criminals to take advantage of us. The next piece to the framework is minimizing impact. If we are hacked, and let's assume we're going to be hacked, how do we minimize the impacts to that? Well, the first step of that, actually there's two steps to this. First is to identify the potential impacts to your business. And then two, take steps to minimize those impacts. And let me explain what I mean. But before I do, this is where it really depends on the kind of business you have. For example, we lawyers, we care a lot about the files we use and client confidentiality. We care a lot about that. But consider like an oil pipeline or utility. They probably care less about files and client confidentiality, and they care a lot more about, I put it here, things that go boom. They're dealing with possibly hazardous chemicals, expensive equipment. And so they want to maintain uninterrupted service. And of course, they don't want anything to go boom somewhere. So there's very different aspects to what the impacts could be. And we have to define those. So all I can do is talk about high-level general concepts. I want you to understand and be clear that this isn't everything. And some of this may not apply to your business. So I'm just trying to give you examples to stimulate the thinking and how you might apply this to your business. But damages to reputation, how might you minimize those? One obvious one is to make sure all your contracts, including the vendor agreements with the third parties, your employees, your contractors, they have confidentiality clauses. If something happens, you don't want them blabbing around. You want to control the narrative. You want to control what information gets out there and to whom. Another one is manage expectations. Don't make promises you can't keep. For instance, I'm a lawyer and client confidentiality is critical. We do this thing called anonymous LLCs. People don't want public information released on the internet, but I don't promise them 100% effectiveness. I can't. They could make mistakes. We could make mistakes. We could get hacked. So we qualify, what we can do. So at least people know, if you want to spend $1 million, maybe we'll lock something up in a vault, but otherwise there are risks to doing business with us. I always recommend getting ahead of the problem. So if a problem does occur, you have to take charge, communicate, and remediate ASAP. Don't wait. Don't wait a day. Don't wait a week. You got to make that a number one problem or a number one priority when a cyber crime happens. And then finally, this goes along with a no-duh thing again. You don't want to violate the law and you don't want to violate your contractual duties. So, what does that mean? Well, I told you earlier what I want you to do to your third-party relationships in terms of indemnities. Well, did they do that to you? And did you inadvertently sign a contract that says, hey, you're going to indemnify them if something happens? So you better be aware of what your requirements are within the contracts and make sure you meet those. And some contracts require notice. So if something happens, they want to know about it. And so you make sure you know what that is and put that into your key processes or critical processes. Harm to others. We talked about reputation, but now what about harm to others? How can you minimize that? Well, reduce single points of failure is one obvious thing. Critical processes should, consider having more than one person's approval or review. Important documents and information, maybe don't throw them all in one drive and directory. Maybe split it out into different directories. What we do, we actually use several different vendors. We use Dropbox, we use OneDrive, and we will put certain types of documents in Dropbox, other types of documents in OneDrive. And the reason we do that is if there's a problem, at least it doesn't totally kill the business. It just half kills the business. So think about how you could do stuff like that. We use real-time dashboards and summaries, and they can flag potential problem areas if that's an opportunity for your business, depending on what you're doing. You know, building redundancy is always critical and important, and checks and balances within your business and structure to help identify problems and remediate quickly will help you do that as well. You know, the goal here is you know, and I didn't talk about this yet because it really varies in how you end up doing this. But there is an issue of detection. You know, can you detect when you're hacked? And so that might be a critical process for you as well. And so then that would be something you would also have to make a priority, is figuring out how to detect when there might be a problem. Finally, well, not finally, we got a couple of more, but let's talk about ransomware briefly. Ransomware is where they get access to your systems and files, and then they encrypt it. And then they say, we'll give you the key if you go and send us some Bitcoin somewhere. How does ransomware happen? Well, it happens because usually one of your employees or computers that has access to sensitive information gets hacked. And then they run a program that automatically goes and encrypts all those files. It's becoming very commonplace, unfortunately. Now, I've known about ransomware for a long time, and we built that into our systems a long time ago. And guess what? We got ransomware ourselves. It was about 2 weeks ago. And what happened was one of my lawyers did what they're not supposed to do and click on a damn link in email, which then enabled them to get hacked. And fortunately, we segment our data so lawyers only have access to the data that relates to their cases, number one. And then two, we noticed that there was a program, so we had detection in place that was sequentially accessing every file in this lawyer's folders. So we were able to figure out what was going on with a couple of hours. And so we shut down that guy's computer, and then we had a good number of files that were ransomware or encrypted. But fortunately, we have a version control, which means every time we make a change to a file, a new copy of it is automatically created. So the latest copy was encrypted, but the earlier copy wasn't. However, we found out that the version control wasn't working for OneDrive. Now, we've tested it in the past and it did work, and then it stopped working somewhere between our last test, previous month or so, and when we got ransomware. So we lost the version control for these files. However, we also make backups. So we were able to then go to a backup and extract the old files and just delete all the ransomware files. So, you know, we've engineered a process, but there's other pieces to this to make it work. And that is to create a backup plan and strategy for your kind of business if this is relevant and important to your business. And it's not as easy as it sounds. It's a little bit of work. You got to decide, you know, how frequently and how far back you should hold on to backups. Let me give you an example. You have an important file and you worked on it today and it gets backed up today. Great. And then you don't work on it anymore. It's still important, but you don't work on it anymore. Now, you know, do you have an infinite storage where it makes backups every day and saves every backup of every day in perpetuity? No, most people don't. What'll end up happening is you'll have most people do backups every day for a week, and then they'll do weekly backups, and then they'll do monthly backups, and then they're done. And then they'll go and either delete those old backups or, you know, they'll put them to offline storage, but we only have so many tapes, and then we recycle tapes and we get rid of the old tapes. So you could easily lose a very important file in your backup processes if you're not careful, if you don't think through those kinds of issues. So, you know, I did mention offline storage capability. I strongly encourage that for any business. And if you're a small business, that that offline storage is easy. Just a thumb drive on your computer. However, get several thumb drives. Use one, you call that your daily backups, and then back it up to another one, call it your weekly backups, and then you use that weekly backup one, once a week. You then do maybe a monthly one, but have several of these, because what we found is, or what we're seeing is, ransomware will attack not just the existing files on a hard drive or network storage system, they will potentially attack some of the storage devices you have, which is why you want the offline storage. So finally, test. And I kind of alluded to one problem we had. We test. We have version control. Well, it turns out that it's complicated. I don't fully understand it myself. I have IT people that work for us, but apparently there was an update with the way Microsoft Azure works for OneDrive, and it rendered our certain types of version control backups they didn't work. So we had to then go to backups. But then I've seen instances where backups don't work for some reason. So you really need to test that sort of stuff, not just once, but regularly, to make sure that they continue to work the way you think they're going to work. And I mentioned version control for important documents and file storage. Both Office 365 and Google provide that as an upgraded feature. So I would strongly encourage you to take advantage of that. And in fact, those products are so good that they are helpful for ransomware. They even have help documents saying, if you're ransomware, here's what you need to do. You need to call us, you need to do that, you need to do this. It's great. You need to take advantage of that system. And then finally, backup for other systems and technologies, right? Just because you're backing up your own computer or your network file storage doesn't mean your accounting software is being backed up. Or maybe you got a practice management system or facilities management system or something. You need to make sure you back those things up as well. Otherwise, you can run into problems. Now, we do have somebody else that came up with a quick question. If your computer gets hacked, will the encryption only happen to files on the computer, or will it also encrypt files stored on your cloud if you have access to them when you're logged in? The answer is, if you are tied to a cloud system, your cloud system could potentially also be hacked or encrypted. It's not a for sure thing. It depends on the sophistication of the ransomware software, number one, and it also depends on how obfuscated access to your online data is. So it is a possibility. Greta asks, can you discuss PCI compliance and how much we should pay for it? I understand we need to have this. Is it from online transactions or all transactions? Do merchant services charge for the service? So there's two issues here. PCI compliance is required by all merchants. Merchants are anybody who accepts credit cards, and they have different tiers depending on how much credit card transactions or processing you're doing in a given period of time. Usually, I think it's a year. It's been a little while since I've looked at the standards. So if you're a really small business, you're usually going to be in the smallest tier, but that still requires an audit, an outside audit. And yes, you have to pay for that, but it's usually very inexpensive and they get it done. But if there's a problem, you have to remediate that. Otherwise, they will then upcharge you for the lack of compliance. So you want to try and maintain PCI compliance. If you're a larger merchant where you're processing, millions of dollars in credit card transactions, then there's much more onerous requirements and procedures on how to maintain PCI compliance. And then you actually have to pay for auditing firms to do that. So that is something you need to take seriously. And then also you need to look at your merchant account invoice and statement very carefully to see if they're starting to tack on charges. And you're going to see it in a couple of ways. One is you're going to see they're going to actual non-compliance fees, which could be pretty significant. But two, they will increase the discount rates that they're charging the business. And so you might see a significant increase in your credit card processing bill if you're not compliant with PCI. So let me keep marching here. We're getting close to out of time, but I want to bring up interruption issues. So that's the business is being interrupted for some reason, and pretty much everything I talked about applies here. The big issue is business continuity planning. If you haven't done that, you probably need to do it or start thinking about it and doing it within the context of cybersecurity, as well as other issues that might happen to your business. So finally, I'm almost done with my talk. We're going to talk about minimizing costs. And I think there's two issues here. One is reducing the long-term costs and expenses associated with cybersecurity in general, how to maintain it. And then the second one, the obvious one is, what do you do when you are hit with a cybercrime? How do you reduce the expenses associated with that? So number one is, minimizing the long-term costs. You really need to integrate cybersecurity into your thinking and your processes and into everything you do. That's going to minimize your long-term expense because it's just going to be integrated into your systems, as well as if you're leveraging the right vendors, they're going to help you do this. You need to train your folks. You need to hold everybody accountable. That's going to help you reduce expenses as well. Now, the other thing is you need to really look at your liability insurance. Do you have the right kind of liability insurance? And it's kind of interesting, right? Just because the harm or damage to your company is through the internet or through a computer doesn't necessarily mean it's, cyber coverage. And we're going to talk about that just for a quick second. But if you were to get hacked and somebody steals a bunch of credit card information, well, that's a liability. You can expect you're going to have customers or clients possibly suing your business, number one. And then two, you may have the credit card companies coming after you asking for fines as well. So you want to look at your liability insurance, see if you have the appropriate umbrella coverage or potential general liability, or if you have specific liability categories depending on the type of business. So you want to make sure you have the right coverage to cover a significant harm that occurs to a third party, clients, customers, vendors, and others. The other thing then is on the expense recovery side when you are hacked, and that is cyber insurance. Now, cyber insurance tends to be pretty darn specific, and you really have to look at what they are and are not insuring, just like you have to do with your regular insurance. And specifically, what you want to look is the disclosure statement, and you want to look at the exceptions. What are they insuring and what are they not insuring? And that will help you understand whether you have the right coverage or not. Cyber insurance, at least the plan that we have as a business, addresses a couple of things. One is if we are ransomware and we have to go through some sort of expense associated with that, they will reimburse us within reason, within certain parameters. They're not going to reimburse us if we send $1 million of Bitcoin to somebody. They will reimburse us if we have to hire a security firm that help us recover our files. They also help us if we have credit card theft issues. They will cover that for us, at least for our online sales, not our offline stuff. So that is what we chose to do, and you really need to look at the policy or policies to make sure that you get the right coverage from that, so that if you do have a problem, then at least you won't be financially devastated. Now, I will tell you that there's also business interruption insurance. So if you're in the kind of business where if you're cyber attacked or hacked and that disrupts and closes your business or prevents you from generating revenue while you solve the problem, that's business interruption, and that's a separate insurance plan. And if that's a possibility for you, it's something you definitely want to look into. Does Carbonite work in backing up data? I'm not an expert on the latest vendor tools and systems. My understanding is Carbonite is a great product and has a lot of great products that can help. But I don't want to tell you that it is the end all be all for everything you need. You got to evaluate it based on your business's specific needs and your processes. People, an interesting story on one of the terrorist issues. I was involved with a company, and it was a hosting company, and we had tens of thousands of accounts from all over the world. And when you have that many accounts, it's very difficult for us to monitor every single account. And invariably, you're going to get criminals every once in a while starting up an account. And that's how we got data about terrorists, and we eventually started feeding it to the FBI as appropriate. But the interesting story here was, all we know is it's a website, and it could be a crazy person or it could be a terrorist. We don't have that ability to know this. And this is why I really started developing an affinity for our law enforcement, especially the FBI. They're just brilliant people. So when we'd find a potential problem, we would let the FBI know and they would evaluate it. And some stuff that would look pretty significant to us, they could care less about. And other stuff that we weren't sure about, was critical. And there was one time it was so critical, they literally shut down the Albuquerque airport for an hour, had a huge, I haven't seen so many cars, police cars in my life. They literally copied the data onto a CD, and then instead of passing it over the internet, it was, I don't know why they did this, but they literally put it in the car, sped off to the airport, put it on the plane that was on the tarmac that shut down the whole darn airport, and then took off for Washington for some reason. So it's just, what the FBI told me was there are so many things going on relating to terrorism and cyber that there's a lot of things we don't know. And those brave men and women are putting their lives on the line, and they are solving problems that we will never know about. And there's different companies and people throughout the world that are contributing and providing information. It's like an entire another world out there with what's going on. But fascinating stuff. So we do have one question from David, by the way. He gets credit card information on forms, and they shred the forms once used. Is that in contrast to a statement about sending credit cards info by the email? If CC info is submitted through an encrypted file, is that the compromise? The answer is yes. You definitely don't want to be sending credit card information in clear text. What we do is we ask for the client's last 4 digits of the credit card information, and we make them sign a CC or credit card authorization. So they're agreeing to be billed by a credit card. They give us the last 4 digits. Then we have a paralegal call them and get the information from them. And by the way, we tell them who's going to call them. So it's not some random person. They know exactly who's going to call and when and why. And then they give us the credit card information that we use to do a small transaction with our software that generates what's called a token. That token then is stored, and the token only works with us and our specific bank. So that if we get hacked, somebody steals a bunch of tokens, that's worthless to them. And that credit card authorization we keep on file, but it only has the last 4 digits. We don't keep any of the other credit card information, but you can encrypt and send it that way. However, you got to be careful about, unencrypting it, and then does that data stay on your computer? So you got to think through the processes on whether you're going to have unencrypted information on your computer, and you don't want to store that if you can avoid it.